Hello YouTube, welcome to my channel. I have two BMX bikes here. Freestyle bike, race bike. What's the freaking difference?
Windy again up this trail. Woo. Try not to overshoot some of these this time.
Here we go, Chad. Oh.
Oh yes. Can't believe I just did that.
So to the ordinary person, these are essentially the same thing. And if you just look at them, they look like the same thing. But they are not the same thing. There's actually some very subtle differences, and I do say subtle because they're more alike than they are different. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the differences and what really makes a race bike and a freestyle bike, or if you want to call this a street bike or street park bike, different. So let's get to it. So we're going to get a little closer here, and this is the race bike over here, and this is my street park bike, freestyle bike, both standards. So this is a standard 125R race frame, and this is a standard STA, and that's a freestyle frame. The thing that's going to be the most difference between this bike and this bike is the geometry. That's really where the major difference is between the two. Then there's some other little key things after that. So let's first talk about the geometry. So on a freestyle bike, you're going to come back here and we're going to measure the chainstay length, and I'm going to just give rough numbers because all bikes are a little different, but from center of spindle to center of rear axle, or when you see slammed on sights on the geometry, that means all the way forward in the dropout. Freestyle bikes are going to be shorter. They're going to be somewhere in the 13, sometimes lower 13 point something inches. You come over here to a race bike and you measure from here to there, same measurement. You're going to get probably about a half an inch to an inch longer. So somewhere in the 14s, low 14s, mid 14s, and so on. Generally, there are different frames that have longer rear ends than this one, but that's basically what you're going for. So why would the freestyle bike have a shorter rear end and the race bike have a longer rear end? Well, let's get into that. Alright, so this is the race bike, and I'm just going to kind of simulate something here, but in racing, you're in a starting gate and you're starting from a complete stop. The gate drops, and you're pushing all your power down on the pedal, and I'm not going to do it on here with my socks on, and you're pulling up on the handlebars as you're coming out of the gate, and you want all that power to go to the rear wheel and propel you forward. The reason why the rear end is just a little bit longer is it helps keep the front end down a little bit. Think drag racing in cars. Some of the cars that have really powerful motors, you'll see the front end come up, sometimes even in wheelie bars. You don't really want a wheelie bar on your bike, but you basically lengthen the rear end just to keep that front end down a little bit. That's one of the key reasons why. Freestyle bike, shorter rear end is going to actually make the front end come up a little easier. A little easier to manual, easier to do tricks, but the bigger reason, it's easier to pop on it, things like that. And for doing spinning tricks, 360s, 180s, whatever, shorter rear end is going to help. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is top tube length. Maybe not always the case, but for me, I run a longer top tube. I run a 21.25 inch top tube on my race bike. And on my freestyle bike, I run a 20.5 inch top tube. I've been considering going to a 20.75 inch top tube, but I've been riding this and I feel pretty comfortable on it. The reason I go with a longer top tube on the race bike is I want the bike to be more stable overall, and the longer wheelbase creates more stability. And on the freestyle bike, I want the shorter wheelbase because it's easier to do tricks and throw the bike around and things like that on it. On the race bike, I'm trying to go over jumps and rollers and things as fast as I can. So it's not about doing tricks or anything, it's just about pure speed. And so having a little bit longer wheelbase added with the longer rear end just really makes a big difference in the stability of the bike. Taking this bike on a BMX track is certainly doable, but it's going to feel a lot more squirrely. It's not going to feel as stable and things like that. So definitely some subtle differences there. One of the things that's actually changed in geometry recently on race bikes is race bikes have gotten to a lot steeper head angle, but they still generally aren't as steep as a freestyle bike. I'm kind of guessing, but I think this is 74 degrees, if I remember right, and this is 75 or 74 and a half. So freestyle bike, maybe a half a degree or a degree steeper head angle than on a race bike, along with the head angle to kind of that same deal with kind of steering, mellowing out the steering, is generally on a race bike you're going to have a little bit more, I forget what this is called, the distance from the center of the axle to the center of the fork, and I think it's called offset, that's what it is. The dropout offset is longer on a race fork, and it's generally going to be shorter on a freestyle bike. Some people on freestyle bikes even want them shorter, where you'll notice that the fork is cut away and then the pegs kind of down underneath. I'm more of an old school rider, so I don't really care. Oh, check out the grind marks on my hub that I'm just now realizing. Anyway, as an older rider, I kind of like a more traditional feel, but a lot of the newer school riders like much smaller offset of the dropouts. So that's another difference. Let's talk about drivetrain next. So when it comes to drivetrains, on race bikes you'll find a much bigger sprocket on the front and bigger cogs in the rear. You don't find this tight of a drivetrain. The reason for that is you want more teeth engaged with the chain, both in the rear and in the front. You want that because it actually reduces wear. You also are putting a lot of power on this. You don't want anything to strip, slip. You don't want too much strain on a small part of the chain to make the chain break, things like that. So it's more for reliability and the fact that you're just going ultra speed, and so the less the chain has to bend to get around things, especially in the rear, the more efficient it's going to be, and the better it's going to ride, or the faster it's going to go. Come over here to a freestyle bike, and you'll notice the front sprocket's a lot smaller, and the rear sprocket's really small. It's like 9 teeth. So you have to see how tight that chain has to wrap around that rear sprocket, or rear cog. The reason that we do this on freestyle bikes is to get stuff out of the way. Doing a lot of grinds, as you can see, I got marks on my cranks, pegs worn, things like that, where you just want the drivetrain out of the way as best as you can get it. If you're doing roll-ins on ramps, you want more clearance here, so your sprocket's not going to hit when you're rolling in on a ramp, things like that. So much nicer to have a smaller drivetrain, and that's another significant difference you'll see between the two bikes. You can definitely talk about strength. Race bikes, you want them to be lighter, so they don't need to be quite as strong. They still need to be strong because you're still jumping, things like that. But I do notice some racers run really lightweight components, and they'll run things like carbon fork, things like that. And I have actually seen that stuff fail for racers, and it kind of scares me. Like for me, I'm still gonna stick with chromoly frame, chromoly fork. It's what I trust. But some racers, they're looking for that little cutting edge, and they'll run carbon forks. They'll run, maybe even carbon frames. A lot of race bikes have aluminum frames. This is a chromoly frame. This bike, fully decked out, is about just over 20 pounds. Pretty impressive, but it's not going to be as durable. I'm going to take the big hits that a freestyle bike can come or get. And you come over here and you start seeing, more reinforcing. This is actually an optional piece. I mainly got this added to have the more traditional standard STA look to it. You can get an STA without this if you don't want it. It does add a little bit more strength in this area. A lot of times you'll see reinforcement gusset plates on the top and bottom on some frames, things like that. Bigger tubing, and keep in mind this is made by the same manufacturer, and the tubing's bigger, a little bit bigger back here, things like that. So thicker dropout, definitely. It's a little bit more weight, much stronger frame, designed to handle the big hits, things like that. This bike with pegs weighs right around 24 and a half pounds. So not bad for a freestyle bike, considering in the 90s, freestyle bikes used to weigh 35, 40 pounds. So I'd say freestyle bikes have come a long way in being a lot lighter, mostly in the frames and the forks. They used to just have, they were so beefy, and they'd use straight gauge, really thick tubing, things like that. And I think over the years, they've decided to apply more technology. So you got double bedded tubing, you have the thermo tubing where when the welds cool, they actually harden at the joints and things like that. There's just a lot of additional technologies that have gone into freestyle frames that have made them a lot lighter than they used to be. And you can see some riders, they'll get their freestyle bikes down to close to 20 pounds also. I have seen that. Other things that are very subtle, if you look at handlebars, yeah, this is a 4-piece bar, but there's also 2-piece bar you can run, 2-piece bar on there. But really, that's mostly going to be a size thing and a rider preference thing. Not a whole lot of difference between handlebars. Maybe these are a little heavier, but all in all, handlebars are kind of more of a fit and personal choice thing. Seat on my freestyle bikes, bit more padded, bit beefier, wider. I actually run it a little higher because I like to actually pinch this with my legs sometimes doing certain tricks, things like that. Race bike, I'm not seated. I don't care. Small, trimmed down seats, slammed all the way down. I'm not going to use it while I'm racing. So that's a big difference there. And then we'll talk a little bit about brakes. So on race bikes, you'll either see V brakes where they're mounted here and they're the traditional cable goes across and they push against the rim, or nowadays disc brakes are becoming really popular. So this is the first time I've ever had disc brakes on a BMX bike. On a freestyle bike, you just destroy a disc brake doing grinds and things like that. So I don't think disc brakes will be on freestyle bikes anytime soon. Freestyle bikes, you're going to see one of two things. You're going to see, well, maybe one of three, I'll even say, because You're gonna either see, like what I have here, I have one rear brake. I have what's called a linear cable, and that means you can wrap the bars around and it won't affect the performance of the brakes. And then you come back here, and this is called a U brake. Some people will call them 990 brakes, but 990 is an actual model made by Diacomp. The real name for them is U brake. They cross over like this. They're super stiff. They work good rolling backwards and rolling forwards, things like that, which you kind of need for a freestyle bike. Or what you'll see on a freestyle bike is no brake at all, and that's actually becoming really popular. A lot of riders ride brakeless. Another thing, and that's why I said third, I thought about it, is sometimes you'll see somebody running a gyro. I have the holes drilled in here to run a gyro. What a gyro allows you to do is the cable goes through it and it allows you to spin the bars without tangling up the cable. But since I'm not a person that really does bar spins, and if I do, I'm only going to go one rotation, and that linear cable works just fine. So the question is, can you take your freestyle bike to the racetrack, and you take your race bike to the skate park? Absolutely. You can do whatever you want. These are just very subtle things for getting the ultimate performance out of these bikes. If you only have one bike, you can only afford one bike, and you want to go try out BMX racing, take the pegs off if you're required to not have pegs, and try out BMX racing. You know, you might like it. Just keep in mind that if you get serious about it, you'll definitely want to upgrade and get yourself a more specific bike. It's going to be a little quicker. Same thing over here. You want to just bomb around a skate park and do stuff, and you have a race bike, have at it. Take it to the trails, ride it in the skate park, and do that stuff. Just keep in mind, if you get really good and you start going big, you probably don't want to be doing that with the race bike and, you know, destroying stuff and having to replace it all the time. You really want the right bike for the job. But you absolutely can cross into one sport or the other with it. This video basically really telling you the very subtle differences, but there's nothing that says you can't take that to the park and ride through it. There's nothing that says you can't take this to the BMX track. The only difference is on a freestyle bike there are requirements on BMX tracks because it's actually sanctioned and they have rules. You can't run pegs, and you absolutely have to have at least one brake. So you can't go to the racetrack brakeless. You have other people on the track, you just have to be able to stop when you need to stop. But aside from that, do what you want to do. It's a free country. All right, I hope you like this information. Thanks for supporting my channel. Please like and subscribe.